I'm kind of glad this happened because, frankly, trying to entertain you after you've eaten would be really hard. So now that I have a decent chance of keeping you awake, which is awesome. All right. I hope you guys have enjoyed the morning of conversation and the insight that's been provided. Yes? Good? All right. Excellent. So I'm going to talk to you about the gig economy a bit because I think it really has not been addressed as folks have talked about. What do we do with the region going through its particular crisis now, and also just the advent of AI and its implications. So I did want to just touch base with it. Was hoping that a partner, we work with Freelancer on prize challenges, would perhaps provide their insight, but that's a whole other issue. They were stuck in Sydney in a home office meetings, and I didn't feel like I'd pull them away. All right. So I'm going to start off with good afternoon, I guess, right? Yes? Good afternoon. Question for you. How many of you interact with the gig economy in some way, right? You bought something, ordered something. Okay, door dashing, Ubering, yeah, all right, deal. How many of you use freelancers, independent contractors? Okay, it's real, all right. It's real to all of you guys. I believe the emergence and the growing impact of the gig economy needs to be factored into this conversation, right, about AI in the workforce. And it goes back to something Terry mentioned in August when we were meeting at Lloyd House, our intimate gathering, but also he's mentioned it today, and it's been repeated a few times now, and that is, while we're going through a massive transition in the marketplace and the workforce, it's really also a pretty major transition in culture, right, from compliance to a bit of risk-taking. And so as we're thinking about making this move, that's a big part of the challenge that we're going to be facing. Because it's a town of federal workers and lawyers, and, they're about compliance. They're about, there's actually someone, I think it's John Wang, is writing a book on comparing China and the U.S. He spent some years in China, and he says, the U.S. is a country, society of lawyers, and China is a society of engineers. And so we are really, it's very facile and very easy for us to say no. No comes naturally to us, and that is particularly true of our region. We have to kind of make a shift. Not entirely, right? Sometimes it's really good to say no, but in some cases we've got to learn to say yes, and let's roll. And I think that's, in many ways, what the gig economy offers. The future we're stepping into, driven by AI and automation, requires this new mindset, right? It's a challenge for us. It's going to require risk-taking. It's going to require government, employers, and educators building new frameworks that are really based on, I would say, skills, flexibility, and opportunity, where those three elements coexist. And nowhere is that opportunity clearer than the gig workforce, right? A sector that's dismissed as peripheral, or has been, but it's becoming a powerful engine of innovation and opportunity around the world. And that's what I wanted to talk about. What's going on around the world? Well, some stats. You can see the gig economy in China has really kind of taken off. U.S., about 10%, but and that's the primary source of income for all of these. In India, that's 2%, but 2% in India, it's millions, right? The folks involved in the gig economy, larger in Malaysia. But the U.S., when you think about folks who are in some way using the gig economy to kind of expand their income, extrapolate their opportunities, that actually gets really close to China levels. And that we don't hear too much about. So it's an interesting stat to take into consideration. Overall, since 2016 through 2023, the online gig economy has grown by 41%. So it's growing rapidly. And there are estimates that on a compounded annual growth rate between now and 2034, that growth is going to continue at a 16% clip. That's big. I mean, that ends up being about $2.2 trillion in our economy. Not insignificant. And while it has an impact on our economy. In China, it is absolutely transforming society. And in many ways, it's good because they'd reach a boiling point with the unemployment they have in the 18 to 24, 18 to 34 category. In China, there are about 200 million people who are working in the gig economy, 40% of the urban labor force. And this flexible work has become critical. It began with the simple value propositions of the companies in China, and that was they needed flexibility, the ability to create, excuse me, a workforce that could kind of change and move with agility with the speed of markets and with the changing geopolitics. And that has been absolutely proven to be the case this year of the tariff, right? They needed this flexibility and they've used it. But, it's not all great. It's certainly there and other economies, right? A lot of these folks, if you looked at the Economist article that we provided in our pre-read, a lot of these folks lack job benefits. They don't have clear pathways to skill development. So the very workers who are kind of keeping the economy humming are locked out of stability. So they lead a pretty precarious life. But like in China and many of these economies, and even our own economy, you can't just stamp out the gig economy and say, well, we're not going to use it. It's too precarious for folks. Because the alternative, as the article notes, is no job. And that's not really a sustainable path, right? No work at all. That's why most forward-looking governments, particularly in Asia, are thinking about or rethinking the social contract, not to eliminate gig work, but to make it beneficial. So in India, you're seeing a lot of the folks who are using the digital gig platforms are receiving, as part of their deal, both health and accident insurance, which is interesting. The last chart I should have mentioned was the compounded annual growth rate to 2034. All right. I'm going to talk about another element of this that we don't hear too much about. By the way, one thing I won't fail to mention is I was corrected by my own staff in just referring to this as a global issue and not getting specific. Our own interns and staff members receive, on an ongoing basis, solicitations, right, from American firms for project work. And these this can be from data science to marketing gigs, right, or marketing data visualizations, whatever the case may be. They're getting these offers, and these offers come through LinkedIn. They may come through a freelancer bid that's being sent to them, or it may come through a targeted social media ad. But they're being contacted, and in a lot of cases, it's pretty interesting, right? It's because it's both accessible and lucrative. So it's happening here in the U.S. To a younger generation that's seeing kind of this opportunity come to them. And so it's a real thing here. And the lesson is, I think, basic. It's flexibility is here to stay. The gig economy is here to stay. The question is, do we design it for prosperity, right? Or do we continue to kind of persist the insecurity that exists among these folks who are dependent on this gig economy? I think it's a choice that we need to consider. I wanted to talk about using the gig work as organizational design. Large organizations are increasingly using sort of project work internal to their organizations. And I'll give you the example of Standard Chartered Bank, UK-based. 60% of its employees now work on an internal gig platform. They look for opportunities, they apply for them, and they'll post them, right, for work that's being done across the company. As the bank's chief strategy and talent officer notes, you don't have to think of an individual by the job title anymore or the job description, but you think of an individual as a collection of skills. And if you do that, then you can effectively kind of manage your company this way. And since 2000, and in the year 2024, they were able to kind of, through this process, drive 8.5 million in innovation through these projects. A lot of them integrating AI within their projects. They were challenged to do so. And What it's also impacted is the ability to retain a lot of these employees because they're able to flex, to learn, to upskill in ways that they weren't able to before. So it's really become, this idea of gig work as organizational design. I'll give you another example. Moderna, same issue, biosciences company. They, in fact, it's a terrify Terry, they fuse their chief people officer role with their chief technology officer role and said, it's now going to be, one person managing both to help integrate, in a true sense, these AI skills. And so they also incorporated a gig platform within their organization, and we're telling staff, let's find ways to integrate AI, right? Post these jobs, apply for them. And what they found was that IT staff were cut by about 10% or so, but what they saw was increasing headcount and increasing revenue because their product development cycle was kind of on steroids. And so what you saw was more products being released, more initiatives, and a need for the analysis, the marketing, the support system behind it. So IT, not so good, great for the product and marketing side of the house. But those are two really good examples of the gig economy being used internally to kind of drive growth. But there's also another story, right? Beyond the gig economy as an employer. It also breeds entrepreneurs. And there may be skepticism about this, but the numbers are real. In a decade-long U.S. tax record study that was done, I think it was at Carnegie Mellon, 2.5% of gig workers started a new business. 2.5, doesn't sound like a lot. But that's a lot more than the less than 1%, 0.7, of the broader working age population. So it's a multiple. Okay, they're a little more, they're willing to take some risks. For many, the flexibility of the gig economy, right, provides kind of the first taste of autonomy, and they kind of like it. And beyond that, also working capital. And so it really becomes a means, a credible pathway to launch a venture. As Carnegie Mellon's Matthew Deans, an author of the study, noted, firms started by gig workers appear to be riskier. They don't have the background, right, to write a business plan. They don't have the financial skills, perhaps, to kind of think through projections. But he also says they realize higher performance if they survive. And I wonder, right, if we provided the scaffolding for these entrepreneurs, these micro businesses, could we change that trajectory, right? Could we stop that failure from happening? It's a challenge, right, for the region. And in turn, I would say one other thing about this. I was talking to Will, just about what it took for me to start a business in Canada. I don't know, God, it was a zillion years ago. But I remember the partnership. We had to raise a few $1 million, give up a lot of equity to Zurich, Canada, as you recall, and it was a tough path. But today, right, these fledgling entrepreneurs in the gig economy, right, they can find suppliers and partners who can help them build this business at a much lower cost. And I bet what took us $2-3 million, right, to kind of start our venture could really be done today for $10,000, $20,000. That's a data point worth remembering as we think about our own region, right? The Washington metro area has one of the most educated workforces in the world, a dense web of mission-driven professionals that we can tap. If we can connect displaced federal workers, university graduates, employers through structured project marketplaces, portable benefits, credentialing and coaching, we can turn a lot of the volatility into velocity for this region, real growth. So what would it take? Keeping the talent in this region will require throwing a lot of new ideas against the wall, and that's what we're all about here today. And I know a lot of you have been to other conferences with that in mind, and it's pretty critical, right, that we do that. The gig economy framework may help us in this transition, but also kind of help us travel the distance to become an innovation hub, innovation center. that leverages federal activity, but is not wholly dependent on it. And that's critical, right? To Alex's point, we're going to remain, I think, the national capital region, but we can't be completely wedded to it, right? And dependent on it. We can create a DMV gig economy that does three things. You see them behind me, right? Builds a regional talent marketplace where displaced and early career workers can find project-based work with verified credentials. And I'll take a moment here as a plug to work we're partnering with Ed, Allison and CREC are helping us with, and that's a Connecting Talent to Opportunity prize challenge. It's a $15 million prize challenge, by the way, but it's creating talent marketplaces that use verified skills. And I think that's a national challenge, but it's one that we can take on as a region. It also allows employers to acquire kind of the needed flexibility they need in a very uncertain time. So these marketplaces, I think, are critical. Number two, offer portable benefits and tax guidance, the scaffolding I talked about earlier, right? So that flexibility doesn't mean fragility for these entrepreneurs and micro businesses. And then third, link employers and universities to treat project experience as credit towards stackable and verified credentials, just mentioned, right? Now that's a nuanced issue. I know there are economics there that are touchy, but it's kind of a dance that we have to at least engage and think about. How do we do that creatively? So this is not charity, it's a strategy. It turns this instability of the transition to an infrastructure of growth in my mind. If China, with its 200 million person gig economy, is a warning to the world, which is what the Economist article notes, and I think it is a warning, but it may be simply, a herald. Then we here in Washington could arguably also be a model for a technology-driven a change that's driven by as a civic project grounded in opportunity and innovation. We can take on that challenge to correct some of the issues that don't exist in China. As one displaced USDA scientist recently said after turning her skills into several projects in the gig economy, I got to use a lot of different parts of my brain. And I think in a lot of ways, we as a region need to unlock our brains, use different parts of it to kind of attack this issue, and see if we can develop the right atmosphere, the right blueprints to use the gig economy as at least a partial solution. So as we prepare to discuss the most promising practices after lunch, I'm going to feed you first, the question isn't whether the gig economy will shape the future, it's whether we can co-create or will co-create a version that expands possibility and productivity for workers, employers, and the communities that we live in, this community. That's it. Thank you.